Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. And today I have a very, very special guest. And as usual, I always repeat, Sat means truth. Myth is a Sanskrit word, means fake lie imagination. Sattology means study of truth or science of truth. And mythology means science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. The audacity of many academic scholars, whether it's Western or Eastern, and the worst is a Western, to call any other culture as mythology except theirs. Therefore, they give the name isms everywhere. Isms, ism means that you're just following it without any archaeological proof, astronomical proof, many things. I have a very, very good friend and a very important contributor in this space who is very famous all over the world today. And without delay, I would like to welcome Sri Raj Vedam.
Thank you. Namaste. And thank you for welcoming me on your channel. Aditya ji, it's a pleasure.
You have done yeoman service to historicity of Sanatan Dharma and Hindutva culture. So particularly I mentioned Hindutva is a Hindi word and Hindutva culture. What do you think? Why do you think people have to accuse, abuse such a peaceful culture across the world, which has only given peace, science, peace, yoga, and also healthy lifestyle? Why do you think it is?
My goodness. We need all day to examine the various dimensions of this strange situation that we find ourselves in, because the amount of bigotry in this space is unlimited. Whichever field you take, you can find out the sources of this kind of bigotry over there, which all adds to this narrative of this sort, which people are upholding today as if it were some kind of great truth. But no, it is not that. So we find that such kind of thinking is rooted in the colonial experience. Prior to the colonial experience, India was a place where people went to for knowledge, for making their fortunes, because India was a place where you go to spice trade, getting whatever precious things it had, commerce, cotton cloth, all these kind of things. India was a go-to place all over the world, whether you were in ancient Greece, whether you were in Rome, or whether you were in Armenia or China or wherever, this was a place to go. So we see that India had an exalted position in the world prior to the onset of the bigotry that we see that happened through the colonial times. Now, as far as the colonial times are concerned, we know that the very, very infamous Christian injunctions that, especially the Catholic Church, wherever the Christians go to any non-Christian lands, they can claim it for Christianity. So this kind of a thinking where the rights of the people who lived in a place, who are non-Christians, by the way, is completely irrelevant to the fact that if Christians come, it has become their land. We saw that happen in America, and Vasco da Gama tried to do that in India and places like this. So this kind of thinking is rooted in the colonial experience, which derives its strength and ideology from the Christian thought of that time, and unfortunately persisting to the present times. So all of this has got its origin in this notion of some kind of exalted position, not only exalted, the only relevant position given to Christianity, that there is some notion of truth where they have a monopoly on this and nobody else has. The only way to the Father is through the Son. When you have some kind of an ideology like this, then everything else is irrelevant. Everybody else is irrelevant, because you're doomed for purgatory unless you subscribe to this ideology. So this is the kind of thinking that colonial people also came with when they landed up in India. And initially, we see that people, the colonial people who landed up in Siam, those days Thailand was called Siam. Again, one more instance of colonialism where the name of that country does not matter. It's only what the colonialists give the name. So Thailand. In Thailand, they obtained astronomical tables in around 1600s or 1650 or in that time frame. And those astronomical tables, they couldn't make sense out of that. So they sent it off to Cassini in Italy, and he analyzed these astronomical tables, and he said that, look, it refers to an epoch of 3102 BCE, and it seems to have the longitude of Benares as well as the longitude of Ujjain in it. And so they scratched their head, how is this possible? So they knew that Indian astronomy has got a calendrical system that has got a zero position somewhere in 3102 BC. How is that possible? Because this seems to be prior to the flood, which is a very, very important situation in the Christian experience, because we have this Noah's flood, right? We have that in those days, at least, the thinking was that God created the world in 4004 BCE, and God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 3000 BC and on, and nothing could have survived the flood even except Noah's descendants. That is the kind of thinking. So any history should emanate from his descendants. So when they found that here are these Indians who have got astronomy, that's got these great timelines, that set them off into thinking. In fact, we have the writings of early colonialists like William Jones. William Jones comes and says in one of his diaries that either the first 8 chapters of Genesis is wrong and our national religion is false, or we had to do something about this Indian religion, whatever this, because the timelines are enormous. And his thinking was echoed later by Max Muller, who also wanted to show Indians that their history is all distorted and things of this nature. So we see that historically, this notion of trying to put down anything Indian and Hindu came about the colonial experience, backed with the intellectual fervor of Christianity, which they came with. They did not want these high timelines, which they saw in the Puranic records, which they saw in the astronomical records, and these things. So they came about with the white man's burden of trying to correct the Indian chronology. So they took it on themselves to say Indians had no idea of time. Indians had no idea of marking anything, no idea of history, no idea of anything. It is up to us to look at their records and correct it and give them a history. So this is the kind of bigoted thinking and arrogant thinking with which they came. And they did exactly that. They took the huge Purana chronology and they started cherry picking from that. They said, this king, phonetically, he sounds like something else. Let us put him there. And this king, we'll put him over here. These are all mythical kings. We'll throw them out. And they took this huge chronology and they lumped it into a very, very small chronology. So the irony of the situation is, prior to the machinations of these colonialists, the chronological list of Puranas had perfect synchronism with the Nepal king list, with the Kashmir king list, as well as in Sri Lanka and other records. We had perfect synchronism with neighboring king lists, put it that way. But after the colonialists were done, the synchronism was completely gone. Even today, we cannot reconcile our history with our traditional records, thanks to the machinations of these people. So what we are seeing is a bigotry at work. I have seen this extensively in history, and I have seen this extensively in astronomy, in mathematics, all the fields of study of Indians. We see this endemic. This problem is endemic over here to such an extent that today we have to suffer history imposed on us, which we cannot recognize. It is not part of our oral tradition. It is not something that we can recognize and say, yes, this is who we are. A bunch of nomads who came from Central Asia and who apparently designed all this, wrote all these Upanishads and these philosophical works in India, who are illiterate people, by the way. We can't recognize any of this nonsense in the history that we have. So, Aditya ji, your question was why are we seeing this kind of hatred over here and so on? It all stems from the colonial experience, which gets its intellectual backbone from Christianity. And that is the reason why we are observing lingering effects of this. So we need to go to the root of this. The root is colonialism. So we need to examine what exactly is colonialism and its successors, who today are upholding this nonsense.
The amazing opening lines, and everyone is amazed. If you can make your camera a little up slightly, so the head space a little bit. Perfect.
How is this?
Very good. Very good.
Okay.
So the so my last book was on gold, glory, and God, and which is the three punchlines of the papal bull. So the
People bull.
entire
Yeah. That's what I was
colonization,
searching for, that word, papal bull. Thank you.
papal
Yes.
bull. So the three words the colonization happened was gold, glory, and God. Now people have no idea. Just from Aztecs, the Spaniards took out 60,000 tons of gold in 100 years. It's just Aztecs. I'm not touching even Mayas and Incas. And today, it's an irony that the entire Mexico celebrates Christianity. And if you go to Brazil, there is no mention of Brazilian culture before Portuguese came there. And if you look at any South America, it's all the fiefdom of Catholic Church, and you can see them. Most of the countries are hand to mouth.
Right.
The poverty has been introduced
Right.
through Christianity. Now, this is what we have seen, that in all these theocratic states, these are theocratic states, and I would say that religiously fascist also, because
Mhm.
they don't accept any other cultures. So
Right.
in all these religiously fascist states, you see, Imran Khan doesn't understand the meaning of fascism, but we know what is fascism means for. It can be religious fascism also, which we have seen right now. Now, most of these countries are poor. This is a historical record. The 57 Islamo-fascist countries have no economic growth. So,
Right.
how do you tie the economic growth to lack of economic growth to a religious theocratism?
Yes. That is indeed a good observation. So one has got to see, when one talks about economy, how exactly do
Only
we.
Raj, I can talk to you like this because you understand what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So this whole business of how do you even make something of value which you can say, let me plug into the economy of the world or so on. The question comes, how do we even do that? So in order to produce something of value, you must have an educated workforce. You must have people who are willing to invest the time in education, invest the time in measuring instruments and quality tools and making some product like cotton cloth or maybe a jewelry item or maybe making some pots and pans or making a cart, whatever. So anything that you make that has got some value that somebody else doesn't know how to make, you got some product of economic value which perhaps the market wants, and so you make your money that way. So what we're seeing in ancient India, remember that if you take the works of economist Angus Madison, he shows that way back at the turn of the current era, common era, India had approximately 35% of the world GDP, a figure that fell by 10% every 1,000 years. Except when the British came to India, it fell from approximately 23%. It fell all the way to 4% in less than 200 years, thanks to the British impoverishment of India. So what that tells us is that India in the ancient world had a very high position thanks to its desirability, the desirability of the products they were making. And that's direct consequence of the education of this country, the kind of goods they were producing, and so on. And the question comes, why in India? What is unique about it? Well, what is unique about it is in India, learning and philosophy were not at loggerheads with each other. The philosophy of the country was tied in with a science. So nowhere do you see a dichotomy saying that this is secular science and this is philosophy. We don't see that. We don't see that because in India, the culture has always been the following. If you have a one-line description of who is a Hindu is somebody who's a seeker who's trying to remove the avidya. Avidya means the ignorance about his existence and search for the truth about his existence. So this makes a person a seeker for knowledge. You question everything. You don't just accept it. You question everything and go after the root of everything. Try to see, is there a greater truth than this? Is there a greater truth than this? So this kind of investigation has led people to postulate ideas about what nature is, examine that. If that is not found good enough, have a new model and propose that and see what happens. And I have evidence of this all the way through. In astronomy, for example, several models proposed in the past and refined and refined and refined. You see that until such time the Muslims and colonialists completely destroyed education in India. So what this tells us is that because there was no dichotomy between science and philosophy, Indians had no hypocrisy to deal with. They knew that let's see what's the best we can make out of something like this. Just to give you one example, Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a science of healing in India, ancient India, right? So in Ayurveda, ill health was seen because of two reasons. Think of a chart over here. So Ayurveda, and on one side, they saw ill health happening because of poor diet, for example. And if you had poor diet, then poor health, and it required the methods of Ayurveda to cure you. On the other side, they saw ill health as happening because of karma phala, what you might have done in a prior lifetime or the current lifetime, and you're paying that karma through this ill health that you have. And to cure that, it required prayaschita in order to cure these things. So what we're seeing here is, even in as ancient a science as Ayurveda, we are seeing that the philosophy of the land is blended into the science of the land. And that is what gave rise to these huge compendiums of medical works of Shushruta, Charaka, Vagbhata, and others, and that formed the basis of Arab medicine, the basis of Western medicine. We have seen that in history, the connections between these ideas going forward. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the Abrahamic experience. In the Abrahamic experience, the goal of life has always been to follow a divine dictated law. The law could have been dictated to a prophet, or could have been dictated by somebody who was positioned as a savior and saying that this is what he's saying, and his followers write it down and people follow it. So the goal in life for Abrahamic adherents is to always follow. You're a follower. You're not a seeker. You should not question. Question is blasphemy. You should not question. Rather, you should follow. Just follow. Knowledge does not matter. Riches does not matter. Nothing matters. Your goal in life, you follow the divine dictated law for admission to eternal life in heaven or to eternal purgatory in hell. They were the only two binary choices. You had no other go. So that was it. So people had to follow. And this led to, as we have seen, enormous problems in the Abrahamic world. If you take a look at the Judaic experience, all the way from about 600 BC, from the tribal Judaism on to the organizations, loose organization, and later, we're seeing that, yes, there were problems because of the kind of tensions they came with their ideology wherever they were, whether they were in the Persian kingdoms or the Assyrians or later on the Egyptians and so on. We are seeing some tensions, and we're seeing the inability by them to organize in a certain way. After Christianity came on the scene and Constantine adopted Christianity in the Roman Empire, approximately 330 current era, and when he did that, what we are seeing is his successor, especially Theodosius, he went on a Talibanic warpath saying that all of the pejorative pagan knowledge should be destroyed because it does not matter, because Christianity is the only true religion, nothing else matters. So they went on a rampage, destroying the Greek temples, the Greek libraries. Anybody who adhered to the Greek ideas, they were all killed or chased out. Several of them left those lands, tried to go elsewhere where persecution is not there. Exactly what the Taliban are doing today. We find that these early Christians were doing that. And what we find is, after Constantine adopted this as a state religion, throughout the Roman Empire, the Western experience, if you will, they fell into dark ages. They fell into dark ages because they lost connection with rationality and logic. That was not part of the equation. Remember, your goal is to obey. Your goal is to obey, not to rationalize, not to make logical statements out of it, not to question it, only obey. So, having lost that ability for rational thought and logical thinking, the Western world fell into dark ages for more than 1,200 years or so, until the so-called Renaissance. And there are reasons why this Renaissance came about. Also, we can talk about that. But the point is that the adoption of Christianity in 330 current era led to a retrogressive move over here economically. So as far as economics is concerned, these people were out of the race over there. Nothing they could do competed, because they had to just follow the law and then pay these church states the taxes and be the peasants and do their role. That is about it. And now, what about the third Abrahamic religion, which is Islam? We are seeing something slightly different in Islam. In Islam, we are seeing that, again, the whole notion of submission, right? You submit to the will of Allah, and Allah's will has been written down in the Quran, and either through the observations of his followers, the hadiths and other things, or the Islamic law and other such things, they've codified a whole lot of things. Again, you should not question. Questioning is blasphemy, and your head will be chopped off. So you better just follow the law. That is the goal of the religion over there. And if you follow the law, by the mercy of Allah, you'll be admitted to Jannat. Otherwise, you are in eternal purgatory. This is the thinking over there. In Islam, however, we are seeing, once it burst out of Arabia and conquered the present-day Iraq and places like that, by the 8th century, it's 711 current era and so on, bin Qasim had invaded India, and he had occupied Sindh and other areas. And once they did that, they also abducted a lot of intellectuals from there, Pandits, and they took them to Baghdad, and they forced them to convert first, and then to translate the Sanskrit works into Persian and Arabic. So we know that texts like Shushruta Samhita, we know that works of Brahmagupta, the mathematician, astronomer, several other works were translated into these things. And the Arabic people, or the people living in Iraq, Baghdad of those days, they were learning these things. And the caliph at that time was a person called Harun al-Rashid, approximately in this time frame, Abbasid Empire. So he was a scholar, and he was very interested in all this knowledge coming in from ancient Greece, from ancient India, and all of these places. And he set up something called the Baghdad House of Wisdom. And this Baghdad House of Wisdom was set up only to obtain knowledge from these various places and encourage learning. And we see that a whole lot of Islamic scholars and scientists of that era, Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, and a whole lot of other Al-Hayatim and such people, they were able to synthesize the works of the ancient Greeks, the works of ancient Indians, and propose their theories and these things. So we are seeing, curiously, in the Islamic world, in this time frame, from around the 9th century till around the 10th century or so, we are seeing an upswell in learning, despite that having no relevance to their admission to heaven or hell. So we are seeing that. And unfortunately for them, by Mongol invasions, this whole Baghdad House of Wisdom was destroyed, and they fell back into medievalism, into a whole kind of violence, and they're not recovered even today. So they're backward and primitive even today, the entire place. So this is what we are seeing. India, like I said, 35% of the world GDP, which is what Angus Madison, historical economist, has told us in the turn of the Common Era. That's what he found, and falling slowly, 10% over 1,000 years. And this is the kind of trajectory we are seeing for India, until such time the invasions pulled it down to 4%. And this is a consequence, like I said, of the learning, because India had a great emphasis on learning, that learning translated into quality goods, into things that the world wanted, and we are seeing that. And on the other side, on Christianity, we are seeing the Dark Ages the minute Christianity was adopted by Constantine, 330 current era. We are seeing prompt fall into Dark Ages, which led on till around the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. until such time the Western European people started translating the Arabic texts into Latin. So this happened in two places. It happened in Sicily, it happened in Toledo. In both these places, they were translating Arabic texts, which in turn were translation of Sanskrit texts into Latin. This is how Europe started getting its ideas of rationality, of logic, of learning, everything once again, after having been the clutches of the church for a very long time. So this is what led to the so-called Renaissance to follow. And unfortunately for the scientists of Europe of that time, they had to face again the prejudice of the Catholic Church, because we saw that Spain was ruled by the Islamic people for more than 800 years. And approximately in 1450, 1490, somewhere in that time frame, the Christians got their act together and they conquered Spain. But once they conquered Spain, they wanted to purge all the so-called non-Christian influences over there. They set up Inquisition. So Inquisition was a part of that culture's framework. It derives from blasphemy. It basically comes from blasphemy to Inquisition. So they went on the so-called cleansing of their society. In that time frame, anybody seen as referring to Islamic knowledge was seen as consorting with Satan, and he would be condemned to the stake, or he'd be killed, or whatever. So we are seeing that all these Western scientists started hiding whatever they have learned from Arabic texts, which were in turn Sanskrit texts, as their own original knowledge, and coming and saying, I invented this, I invented that. So we see this ridiculous spectacle of Renaissance and later, where an illiterate, poverty-ridden, and disease-ridden kind of people were coming out saying they learned those high skills. Where did that come from? They don't say that 3 centuries of gestation on Arabic / Indian / Greek knowledge is what led to this framework. Then after that, we have seen what happened once Constantinople fell, and there was to the Muslims, and there was a desire to find a land route to India, Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and we know the impact of colonialism, what it has had. And eventually the Catholic Church and its role in trying to possess everything for itself. And we have seen that. And we have seen finally how when the Western people, after the so-called Reformation, they're able to challenge the Catholic Church, and the Protestant movement came about, and the so-called age of rationalism dawned on them when they were discovering the philosophies from the East, and people like Voltaire and other such people. So we are seeing over there suddenly emphasis on science, technology, which is subsidized by the colonial loot from India. That loot is what subsidized much of this learning, the Industrial Revolution, and so on. Bottom line, from 1500s to 1900s, the colonial people had a monopoly on science and technology because they had occupied and destroyed all the civilizations which prior to them were in this space. So that's a long answer, Aditya-ji, but this is the historical experience of why economy and philosophy, how these two things are gone hand in hand. In the Western experience today, because of the so-called secularism, they have been able to keep under wraps all the irrationalities of that philosophy and try to progress in the secular science. And one example of that is when poor old man Darwin went off in his beagle to the Galapagos Island and discovered a whole lot of things. And he said, hey, it looks like there's something like natural evolution over here, natural selection is happening over here. And a whole bunch of irate fundamentalists back home, his home, were trying to say, what on earth? We don't have any links with the gorillas and apes and monkeys. We are made in his image, which means that we are perfect, we are God, we are not dissonant. So this whole business of theory of evolution continues to trouble so many fundamentalists even today. And we saw the spectacle in the United states like Kentucky and states like that, where until recently, they were stamping on their textbooks, science textbooks, high school science textbooks, theory of evolution is only a theory and not an accepted fact, because they're afraid that these ideas would corrupt the good Christian lads' minds. So this whole notion of secularity, trying to separate science and philosophy, is a curious outcome of Abrahamic thought, which seeks to uphold its untenable notions and untenable postulations, and trying to reconcile with the truth. Hindus, on the other hand, have had no problem because we are seekers of truth. We see truth. If there's truth over there, we accept it. We make it part of our journey. It might not be the complete truth. There could still be some maya, something hidden over there. But our hope is that as we continue with our sadhana and spiritual progresses, then we hope to uncover even that and lead to greater truths. Every small step leads to bigger and bigger truths. That's the exact process a scientist follows. I, as a scientist, do the same today. I know that what I know is nothing. And I know that there's something out there. If I search hard enough, hopefully I will try to uncover what that is. This is the exact path of a Hindu. Long answer, but that is where it is, Adityaji.
No, very well put it. And you mentioned many words I caught on. One was Satan, one was secularism. We all know the word secular started coming more in the French Revolution, where they wanted to separate the church from governance. And
Right.
that's where the concepts of left and right came. And so when any Indian says we are a right winger or a left winger, it is a laughable time.
Right.
Because in democracy, it keeps changing. If you go by the original definition,
Right.
anyone who favors the one in power is a right wing by nature, by the definition. So, and we are dharmic wingers. We are not left winger, not right winger.
Right. Well put.
So the next question comes in the vilification of all Eastern cultures, primarily Sanatan Dharma, Hindutva. I would like to say that Sanatan Dharma and Hindutva are non-different from each other because colloquially, Hindus are the largest followers of Sanatan Dharma. So it's a Hindutva. Now, if you look at the vilification of Satan and Satan, Shaitan in Hindi, they call it nowadays. It's an Arabic word. It has nothing to do with India. Now, the permanent classification of evil and permanent classification of good. Therefore, I oppose Sri Ram's story as victory of good over evil, because that is not the story.
Right.
It's the story of Dharma, victory of Dharma over Adharma. Now, this vilification of Eastern cultures that you believe in reincarnation, you believe in there is no like multiple lives. This is a very foolish attempt to minimize their own intellect. What do you say on that? And it really ties up with the critical faith theory, which is the word I introduced in my last book.
Very true, very true. So we see that especially the Christians today and the Muslims obviously have got great difference anxiety because they are so different from the Eastern religions. And the underlying philosophy, like I said, in one case seeking truth and the other case seeking to obey. And in the face of uncovering so many scientific facts about their own natural world and how it is at odds with the philosophical systems they have, I think this has led to their anxiety that, wait a minute, all is not well over here. And the fact when Arabs started encountering Hindu medicine, Hindu sciences, Hindu mathematics and such things, once again, the anxiety that, look, they discovered great truths over here, the natural world and so on, which doesn't fit very well in their worldview. So I think this anxiety has what has led to the current situation. So I started saying about the colonial experience, and you correctly put the words over there, the papal bull. Things like the papal bull, things like the only way to the Father is through the Son, and things of these kind of exclusivity of this nature is what they came with, trying to say their experiences are best. And not only that, they also had this bigoted racial theory going back to Noah. So Noah had three sons, Ham, Japheth, and Shem, and so on. Some incident in their biblical stories, and one of the stories says that there was some incident in which Ham was cursed by his father Noah, to serve the other two sons' descendants. So Ham had the mark in a way. So their thinking is that the world was populated by these three sons, where Ham's sons were all the non-white people, and Shem's sons were all the Judaic people, the Semitic people, and Japheth's sons were all the white race, and so on. So this racial theory took hold in addition over here, which led to one more level of bigotry over here, even within the Abrahamic faiths, where they thought that use biblical justification to do things like slavery, even though some of the slaves might be Christian, might have converted. No biggie, you're not equal to me, because look, there is a biblical law out here that says these things. So we are seeing all these contradictions in the Abrahamic texts, which they also were aware of, as their sensitivity and their let's say their civilization IQ increased with time, leading to the so-called Renaissance and Reformation, age of rationalism. They were able to realize some of these things, get away from the clutches of that kind of thinking, get unshackled of that kind of ideology. They were able to think even more clearly. So I think bottom line, we are seeing that in Sanatan Dharma, we have not seen this injunction of sticking to ideology. Rather, it is a seeking of truth. And on this side, it has always been this bigotry, which has come out of ideological ideas. It has been these exclusivity ideas that this is the only way to the truth and every other way is wrong. And all of these ideas that has led to something like this. So we saw the colonialists who did all of this nonsense. Now, at the same time as the colonialists were doing this, William Jones had also seen that it looks like Sanskrit is related to Latin and Greek. And the question was, how is this possible? So in late 1700s, it was caused a great consternation in Europe. How are we related to these Indian people? How is it possible? And so was born this field of linguistics, and all through the 1800s, a whole lot of Eurocentric people and racists, basically, they came about proposing all kinds of theories, all kinds of laws, so that if they saw that one word is morphing into another word in this one, they were able to come up with a sound law which will cover how a bha becomes a va and things of that nature, and try to propose a so-called migration route. So they proposed that there was a Proto-Indo-European language, which they proposed was in some homeland, and that also caused great agony for them. Where this homeland was it in Germany? Was it in Caucasus Mountains? Or was it in Armenia? Was it in India? And finally, they settled on Central Asia. They said this language is spoken in Central Asia. And those people, once they had domesticated the wild horse and they had invented chariots and they had the superior swords, they were able to go off on a conquest wave of the world. And in several waves, they occupied Europe. And one of the waves, they went into India and they became the so-called Aryans. So this was a huge edifice of Eurocentric thinking through the 1800s. The so-called Aryan migrations or invasion, whatever we like to call it, and coming into India. So in addition to this colonial ideology, which was born out of this kind of bigoted thinking, wanting to occupy India, wanting to control them, and taking inspiration from the Bible, going on to Eurocentric people who wanted to put some distance between themselves and these strange looking people in India. So they came about with this idea that Central Asia, migrations, and then that is how these white people who came from Central Asia mixed with the existing people in India. That's how they became colored. All these kind of nonsensical notions which exist even today in the genetic studies. This came about. And we are seeing along the colonialists, the missionaries who once again had only one mandate: try to convert the world into Christianity at any means possible. Bearing witness need not be the best. You can do false witness also here. So they came about with, they were scholars. The ancient days, remember, the learning was in the hands of the elite, and the monks were the elite. They were the ones who had the learning. They were the ones who had all the books in their monasteries and things like that. So these people came to India and they were at the forefront of translating all these Sanskrit works that they were getting. And they had an expeditious translation in whatever they wanted, and whatever they wanted to see reflected over here. So we're seeing a lot of distortions having come into the English translations of the Puranas, into the Upanishads, into so many other works. We are seeing distortions having come through these people, once again motivated by these ideologies to show that Christianity was the way to go, and all of Hindu thinking is corrupted, false, and so on. And India, after it got independence in 1947, we have seen that the Nehruvian socialists who took over the reins from the colonialists, and they continued in the same time frame because Nehru belonged to the so-called Fabian socialism. Fabian socialism believes in a classless world order in which you can accomplish a classless old world order by destroying the old order. The old order, by definition for them, was corrupted, was bad, backward, primitive. It needs to be jettisoned or destroyed in some means in order for progress to happen. So this is the thinking with which Nehru came, and he had the least amount of respect for the ancient civilization of India. He had an opportunity to reinstate a lot of things, but he did not do that. And we are seeing that after him, 1971, the Marxists took control in India, the education sector at least, thanks to Indira Gandhi. So they took over the education sector, and all of the works in India from their own history and other such things have been controlled by the Marxists. And in a strange coincidence of interest, the Marxists are interested in destroying the old order, which is Hinduism, in order to inject their so-called classless society. And the Marxists believe, by the way, in Karl Marx ideas, that all of history is a history of conflicts. And in order to get this utopian society, you must have a bloody revolution. And that is the kind of ideology they came with in India. So they saw all of social dynamics in India as one of class conflicts. And we see that reflected even today in the discourse in Western academia, in Indian academia, everywhere. All of social dynamics is in the prism of oppressor, oppressed. And this kind of horrendous thinking has come because of Karl Marx ideas. So we are seeing that Karl Marx ideas, as well as the socialist, Fabian socialism ideas of destroying the old order, as well as missionaries' goal of destroying Hinduism so Christianity can prevail, as well as Eurocentric ideas of destroying the Indian civilization so they can show the superiority of the Greek civilization, Roman civilization, as well as the colonialists. All these interests have converged. It has converged. Although they're strange bedfellows, their interests have converged, and we are seeing the effect of that on the Indian history, on Indian rather the narratives on Indian history, on the civilization, and so on. That is why we have this ism coming over here, Hinduism, which is more of a pejorative over here. I mean, if you were to ask these people why not Christianism, obviously, it's a pejorative for them that no, it is not a Christianism or a Mohammedism, it is Hinduism, because all these things are lumped together over here as some entity I'll take with tweezers and study it and throw it somewhere. This is the way it is handled. So, Aditya ji, this is the way we are seeing this bigotry continuing from colonial times through the present times, primarily because of these ideologies that these five entities are espousing. And there is no basis for this at all. If one goes after the truth and studies these fundamentals, you'll find that every one of these bigoted statements have a root in their ideologies, and it has to be discarded because it is not truth.
Very well put it. The politics of isms, because you rightly said Christianism, Islamism, Mohammedism, they don't use all these words, only reserved for the Eastern cultures like Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. And whenever you call it Christianism, they get really offended. Islamism, they get really offended. But the only cultures with historical, archaeological, and astronomical proofs is the Sanatan Dharma culture.
Right.
We call it Hindutva or Sanatan Dharma. Again, I'm repeating those two words because we need not get offended by it, nor we should defend it. Because either ways, we are playing into their hands. So there is another concept of now recently came in, the white guilt. has come into the Western Hemisphere, and we see, I'm not in any way, I'm color blind, by the way, because I don't see the color of the skin. And I call it a skin disease, by the way. And so we personally, like if you go to India, then in the North India, you have very fair complexion people. Eastern India has very fair complexion people. And sometimes in Chennai, you have very fair complexion people. So skin color has no connection with the identity of the individual. And that's what Sanatana Dharma stands for, identity of the soul. Now, coming to this ism, politics of isms and the racism, which is an anthropological construct, and we all know the majority of the DNA connects back to India. So to remove India from the equation, they say the first human came from Africa. So very strategic ploy. So what they're actually hiding is a critical faith theory, that the entire colonization happened because they thought that their culture, they're more better looking people as compared to others, which is again a relative concept. A Chinese may not like European features completely. You know, they have their own beauty standards. Africans may not like European features. It is local to Europe. But the imposition, like the Christianism, biggest festival is coming of Christianism, where we see that a flowing golden hair of their Messiah, whatever they call it, prophet or Messiah, and white European features from Scandinavia, and having a reindeer going into the sky. Ultimate mythology. Okay, we do have those descriptions in Vedas, but with a lot of background. But again, flying into the sky with a reindeer, and even a city like San Diego, people are celebrating snowflakes. You know, this is the height of everything. Even in Africa, they are using the nativity signs, symbols, with ice flowing. Now, Mount Kilimanjaro aside, they have snow there. But how can a desert in Sahara Desert, or the large, they have African desert, can celebrate snowflakes falling from the sky? Now, this is the ultimate of what you call it, dumbing down of a civilization or mocking a civilization. What do you have to say on the politics of isms and the challenging the local cultures here?
So Aditya, this is an excellent question. And the reason we need to study this is because it is an existential challenge to the Abrahamic ideologies. Existential challenge. This is what we are seeing. Because like you correctly said, the question should be, what is the root of many of these things? I'll give just one example and I'll continue from there. Buddhism. So over here, we are seeing that in the lifetime of the Buddha, there are many stories over there which have exact parallel true copies in the New Testament. And the question is, how is that possible? For example, Buddha, when a woman of the town, she wanted to give Buddha some food and so on. His followers said, no, don't take it from her. She was not respected and so on. And Buddha is supposed to have said, who among us over here has not, in a sense, have bad virtues, and we all aspire for goodness. This is his thinking. This exact story is preserved in the story of Mary Magdalene in Christianity, where she's supposed to have associated with Jesus Christ. And his followers said, don't associate yourself with a woman of loose virtue. And he said, let he who is sinless cast the first stone, and this kind of a thing. It's the exact true copy of this. And we are seeing the stories, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, we're seeing stories are exact true copies of Buddha's lifetimes. For example, you might want to read a Japanese author's book called Anisaki, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the name of the book, author, a Japanese author in the turn of the last century. So you can read his book where he's given side by side, this side, what is there in Christianity, this side in the Buddhist canons. And so it's an existential challenge because now people who claim the infallibility of the gospel truth now must say, what is this truth in Luke's gospel, if it looks like all these accounts are true copies of the Buddhist experience? So we are seeing that Buddha now is a direct challenge to Christianity. How do you deal with this? So, some in the past, some fundamentalist Christians have gone to the extent of saying that when things were written down in the Buddhist canon, whether it is Lotus Sutra or the Diamond Sutra and other such things, by that time it's already corrupted by Christian thought, and that's therefore it's all Christian ideas over here. Utterly bogus. So we are seeing that there is a spin that is made to try to address some of these problems. So talking on existential issues, once again, the problem comes on ideas in Christianity itself. So we are seeing that many of the ideas in Christianity, not only from the lifetime of Buddha, we are also seeing parallels with the Bhagavad Gita. There are several instances where one can see parallels from the Bhagavad Gita statements into the statements that apparently in Matthew's statement and others, it's so-called attributed to Jesus Christ. We are seeing such things. How is that possible? And similarly, in the Upanishads, several of the Upanishads ideas are embedded inside the New Testament. How is that possible? And in much of Christian art, if you look at Christian art in Byzantine times, we are seeing almost all of the Christian iconology so showing Christ with mudras, is holding fingers and of this nature. What is a mudra? Mudra comes from Indian thought. It comes from the healing practices of Ayurveda, sadhana, dharana, chakras, and all of these things. What on earth is Jesus Christ doing, holding mudras and holding the benediction sign and the protection sign, the giving and the protecting signs? We are seeing all the iconography of Hinduism in the Byzantine art. So when you look at many of these things, let me give one more example. The greatest theologian of the Catholic Church, not Augustine, what is his name? I forget his name, who wrote Summa Logica, I forget his name. I think it was Augustine. I could be mistaken though. So when he wrote his theology in Catholicism, he left it unfinished because he said he had had an experience that is so great that it is far more important than anything he was doing in writing this Summa Logica over here. And it turned out that he was a practitioner of yoga because ideas of yoga were already present in that part of the world. So he had got a yogic revelation where he saw some truths and he saw that what he's writing over here is irrelevant. So he left it unfinished. Even today, Catholics need to say, why on earth did he leave this unfinished? And that question is unaddressed. So we are seeing this time and again. And again, if you go back to the historical roots of Christianity, go to the time of another Augustine, the 6th century, or if you go back to the Neoplatonists and the DNA of Neoplatonism, which came from Platonism, which Plato got his ideas, the Upanishadic ideas from the Upanishads through the Indo-Greek contacts. If you look at this, we are seeing clearly a DNA of ideas from Sanatana Dharma into the Greek thought, from Greek thought into their philosophers, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all of their ideas have got what we can clearly see roots from Sanatana Dharma. And if you come to the time of Ammonius Saccas was a philosopher in Greece who's supposedly an Indian who resettled in Greece around, I'm tempted to say 200 BC. I could be mistaken on my time frame, but he reconciled much of Plato's thought with Upanishadic thought, and therein was born the idea of Neoplatonism. And his greatest student was Plotinus. So Plotinus is today known as exponent of Neoplatonism. And from Plotinus, we are seeing a parampara that leads into many of the early Christian theologians. I forget many of their names. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I do have it in my notes. There are several theologians who derived from Plotinus ideas, and these ideas form the corpus of Christian thinking going forward. So when I said existential challenges, I meant these things. Historically, we are seeing several lines of transmission of Indian thought, Indian philosophy into the so-called Abrahamic faith. So now we have been talking about Christianity. If you go a little further back to the time of Abraham, Abraham's the patriarch of Abrahamic thought, obviously, Judaism and all those things. So in the account of Abraham itself, we are seeing parallels with Sanatan Dharma. The Puranic stories seem to have very eerie parallels with what Abraham is supposedly to have done. To start with, Abraham was from a town called Ur. Ur is an Indian word for town. Starting from there, we're seeing Indian influences over there. And his in the New Testament, sorry, the Old Testament account says that Abraham's father was a murti maker. So he had a workshop where he made murtis and sold it. One day he leaves Abraham in charge and he goes off somewhere. Abraham takes a hammer and breaks all the murtis in his father's workshop, but he leaves the largest murti intact. He leaves the hammer in that murti's hands. Father comes back, who is, what happened over here? And Abraham says, I don't know what happened. And then he says, perhaps this biggest murti, he broke all the others. Father says, don't talk nonsense. We know that the murtis cannot do that. Abraham is supposedly supposed to have said, so why do you worship these? So we are seeing iconography in this one, iconoclasm in this one, which is turning away from the beliefs and the practices of earlier people. Earlier people meaning the people who lived in that part. So the Old Testament says God then took, his name was not Abraham at that time, his name was Brahm. He took Brahm from that side of the river to this side of the river. He doesn't say which river. He just says that he put him over here. And thereon his name became Abram after that. And his wife was Sarai or Sarah. And then their peregrinations, they went to Egypt. And Egypt, they confronted the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh discovers he's lying, that he had said, who is this? It is my wife or my sister. I forget exactly what it was. It turned out to be an incestuous relationship, which the Pharaoh found out later. Then he says, no, it's both my wife and my sister. That's why I said that. So all of these things have got odd parallels with Puranic accounts also. In the Indian account, there is the story of Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. So Vishnu and Brahma find a huge light that starts, no beginning, no end. There's is metaphor for life, or for metaphor for Brahman, that a pillar of light has come. We don't know where it has begun, where it has end. So they have a challenge, and they say that one of us will go to the top, one of us will go to the bottom, find the beginning and end. So Vishnu takes the form of a boar, and he goes, digs down into the earth and tries to find out where it is. And Brahma he flies to the top, and he says, I'll go there as a swan and see where he is, where the beginning is. And on the way, he finds a flower falling, and he says, can you come with me to Vishnu and say that you fell from the beginning of this and you found it? So Brahma comes and calls Vishnu and says, look, I found the beginning, this flower is on the top. And the minute he says that, Shiva comes out of the pillar and says, you lied, Brahma, because you did not go to the top. Because of that, you'll never be worshipped in India. And so Brahma became a liar. And the question is it the same Brahma we're talking about in the Puranas? See, the issue in India is that when we have a story and a wisdom, we take actors from the Indian diaspora, Indian thought systems, and we use those actors, divinities, in place of the actors to communicate a thought. And here is one such historical incident tied in over here, where some individual was ostracized from the Indian way of thinking because of their strange ways of doing things. And it is preserved in this particular story. And this is where Brahma became a Brahma. Whenever you attach a to a word, becomes opposite of that. So you're not Brahma, but you're a Brahma. So he's ostracized. And that's therein begins his peregrinations. So what we are seeing is, whether you go to the time of Abraham, whether you look at the Genesis stories, even the Genesis story of Adam and Eve, that also has got a notion of turning away from Sanatan Dharma. If you take the story, what does the story say? Says God made Adam. Adam is lonely, so God puts him to sleep, takes his rib and makes a woman out of that. That is Eve. And he tells them both, look, you can enjoy everything this Eden. You do anything you like, but don't take that tree of wisdom, that tree, that fruit is forbidden to you. Don't take that. So they agree and they have a good time over there. Then one finds the snake. Snake is very important. Snake comes on the scene, and the snake comes and tempts Eve, saying, if you eat from that apple, that tree of wisdom, you'll realize that you're as powerful as God. You'll realize that. So why don't you do that? So the Eve is tempted. She eats it. She gives it to Adam. Suddenly they get Viveka, that they are not clothed, and they hide behind a bush. God comes and asks, "Where are you? I can't see you. Why are you hiding behind the bush?" He comes, "No, they have eaten that." Curses them, throws them out. Fall of mankind, the original sin, all that starts over there. So the point is, the snake is important. A symbol from ancient worship, evolution of worship in India itself. We're seeing from Rudra, snake, and other such things. Snake, and what is the message snake gives? That you are Brahman. You can be as powerful as whatever you're thinking if you have sufficient viveka and the sufficient understanding of yourself, the search for truth, and so on. That is the ultimate goal. That is what it says. And there's a turning away from that idea. You're seeing that God had forbidden that knowledge. You should not have knowledge of Sanatan Dharma, that philosophy, that you are Brahman, that Aham Brahmasmi. That thought must go away from you. So you should become an obeyer, because I gave you a law. That law you should have obeyed. You disobeyed that law. Therefore, you'll be punished. So we are seeing in the DNA of philosophy, in this Abrahamic thought, whether it is Judaism, whether it is Christianity, we are seeing so much of thought from India, which is obvious because of the historical connections. Going back to history, we can trace the actors where these ideas came in, and so on. So that is the bottom line. Existential challenge. Historical record clearly shows existential challenge to Christianity, to the fundamentals of the civilization itself, because we can see these truths over here. And in order to do this, we have to go back to what William Jones and others did. William Jones said, either the first 8 chapters of Genesis are wrong, or we need to do something about this whole Hindu thought. What shall we do? So they took the other path. They said, let's uphold the Bible and let us now corrupt Hinduism. That same thought is continuing till the present day, Aditya ji. And that is the reason why even today you're seeing all this kind of thinking coming into the fray.
No, very well put it, Raj, and, like very articulately put it also. Because, the point is that our silence emboldens them. When the Hindus or Hindutva followers, Sanatana Dharma followers don't speak up, it is automatically construed as acceptance. And there is a large uncommonsensical wing in India, which gets their degrees from Oxford and Cambridge and tries to propagate their knowledge about India from their perspective, what they've learned from their masters.
Right.
They are the ones who propagate or destroy the mindset of free thinking mindset. So they're actually against the freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to continue this colonial hombo jobbery, whatever you call it, mambam jobbery, whatever it is, abracadabra, whatever they continue with these kind of fake ideologies. My last question to you is, now the natives from all over the world are a victim from this European exceptionalism, coming from the church. And if you recall very clearly, after the Romans were defeated, the church became the Roman Empire.
Right.
They usurped the Roman Empire. So the Catholic Church in Vatican is the new Roman Empire, which is already the largest landowner in the world already. Now, in the beginning of the talk, you had mentioned, and I've also mentioned in my book also, that USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are occupied territories. They're not free territories. Similarly, the occupation of Iran, Pakistan, Bangladesh, because the mindset is the occupation also. It's not just the land. And these are all occupied territories. There are no, if you look at Iran, there's just a lot of freedom movement against the mullahs. And if you know, Pakistan is gradually waking up that they are poor because of their accepted Abrahamic thought process. Now, this slavery can only be challenged by Sanatan Dharma, primarily Bhagavad Gita, which is actually makes you independent and free thinker. Now, we have, I have called it very boldly that it is the only book of independence. Everything else is slavery. Now, when we look at the human rights excesses on all these occupied countries, what happened to natives in North America? Nobody talks about. What happened to natives in Canada? We are still digging out the graves right now of children. What happened to the natives of South America? They don't even have a voice because their temples were destroyed. Lady of Guadalupe is an excellent example. A church of Mother Mary was built on it. Now, I have no problem with the word mother, but I have problem with the word Mary because I do not think so. We should call it the Mother Guadalupe.
Mm.
And so the how the when we are as independent people can question why is that the most of us are not challenging these human rights excesses across the world against the native cultures. What is the reason for that, according to you?
Yeah, yeah. So the process of decolonization is not trivial. It is multi-generational trauma, as very intelligent people before me have pointed out, that it is a multi-generational trauma that goes through. The reclaiming of one's identity can only be done with knowledge. What do you do when that knowledge is unavailable to you? So that is what we are, that is a situation we find ourselves in today, where we don't have that knowledge. We don't have our true history. We don't even understand our own religion because the frames and the terms of reference have been set by the colonizer. Colonizer, with their expedient translations, have done a certain kind of mischief over here to set your identity to whatever they want. So because of these, what we are finding is that all over the world, the original people, I hesitate to call them a native, the original people of the lands which are occupied, they don't have a voice because their civilization has been stolen from them. It has been destroyed. Their idea has been destroyed. Their thinking has been destroyed. Their symbols have been destroyed. Their artifacts have been destroyed. And this and the notion of Christianity or Islam has been forced on them. Because of that, they have utter ignorance of their past, and they're completely chained and shackled to this new way of thinking. The few thinkers in these societies who are able to challenge these paradigms and try to see their true identity are finding it difficult because the lack of knowledge out there. Take the example of Sanatan Dharma. Our civilization's history, like I said, has been utterly corrupted. Are we a young civilization or are we an old civilization? So if we are an old civilization, existential challenge for Abrahamic thought and Western ideas. So therefore, India has got to be a young civilization. What is the corollary if you're a young civilization? Well, what does young civilization even mean? It says that when you say this nomad from Central Asia came into India, illiterate people, by the way, they destroyed a superior civilization, the Harappa Indus Valley civilization. They destroyed the superior civilization, occupied this land, and they had to wait for 1,000 years, these illiterate nomads who didn't even have a script, and they were so backward and primitive, cow worshipping and all these things. They had to wait for 1,000 years till civilization came back in Magadha, far away in Magadha, eastern side, after contact with the Greeks, 300 BCE. So between 1500 BC to 300 BC, India was illiterate, and this is the kind of narrator. Therefore, they say, how could you have had enough time, gestation time, to have got mathematics, to have got astronomy, to have got philosophy, to have got all these wonderful sciences? You don't have, you're a backward people who became civilized after contact with Greeks. Therefore, all your ideas must have come from ancient Greece, ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, ancient China. Everybody taught you these things. So this is who you are. So we are seeing that these paradigms have been set very, very early on by these frameworks, like I said, colonial, the Eurocentric, missionary, and socialist and Marxist in the Indian experience. This is what has been set over here. So by by corrupting our history, the root of that, are we an old civilization or are we a young civilization? Right over there, that corruption has given them the empowerment to continue with this fabrication of history going forward. So going forward, everything has been learned from outside. That means you have no really good identity. What you have is something called caste system. Imagine you're inhuman. People with caste system, cow worship, oh my goodness, sati and child marriage and all these horrendous things. This is who you are. Guess what? Every single aspect is tuned to make you feel ashamed of yourself, to make you reject all this. Oh my God, I'm associated with all this muck over there. Throw it all out, and then, oh my God, look at the superior civilization from the West. It has come there with so much science, technology, and look at the riches and the majesty of their parades and their finery and things like that. That must be a superior culture, and let me become a Christian. So it's all designed to remove you from your civilization through difference anxiety, through these feelings of shame and revulsion, and take you away from this. So the reality, as we're finding out from our history, is corrupted history, completely corrupted in service of these ideologies. That is what we're finding. It is not a unique experience in India. We're finding the same thing in Native America. If we're finding Americas, we're finding it in Africa, we're finding wherever these colonialists went, they did the same nonsense over and over again. They went to these people, put them as primitive, put them as backward, put them as requiring the healing touch of the white man's burden and abilities to civilize them. We are seeing this kind of thinking over and over again. As an example of the deadliness of this kind of thinking, this whole business of Aryan and Dravidian, which was concocted by the colonial and the Eurocentric and missionary people, that found expression. For example, we find that expression in Sri Lanka, in the civil war in Sri Lanka. For years, the Tamil people battled the Sinhalese people, who apparently were Aryans and they were Dravidians, and that played out in a deadly way over so many years, so many lives taken. Now let's go to a different continent, Africa. The Tutsi people, the Hutu people, Tutsi people, we saw Rwanda genocides over there. That whole thing happened because these are people who are living in amity for centuries, thousands and thousands of years. They were living together, no conflict, no nothing. Then the missionaries came over there and they said that, these people are fairer skinned and they came from outside, they're occupying your land. The minute they put that poison into people's thinking, that led to one of the deadliest genocides in which the church is utterly complicit over here. So we are finding that again and again. It is a good strategy. If you want to kill somebody or have genocide, you first demonize them. You demonize their practices. You demonize those people. Once you sufficiently demonize them and dehumanize them, then removing them is trivial because you got public opinion on your side. We are seeing that throughout Christian history, starting with Circus Maximus. If you go back to the so-called Nero fiddling when Rome was burning and all this kind of imagery of Christian martyrs being given to lions and all this nonsense, you find that the reality was that there was revolts by these people over there, these neo-Christians over there, who are going around and burning things, who are destroying things and so on. And Nero was taking the punishments of that time. The punishments were you'll be thrown to the lions if you were to indulge in these kind of state crimes. So we are seeing time and again, we are seeing the following. One is paint the cultures you want eliminated as backward, primitive, and demonize them so that you can remove them from the picture. That is one way. Or you paint yourself as a victim. You say that we have become victims in face of this powerful civilization over there, and therefore we need to remove these guys because, I'm the poor victim. So we are seeing the victim card and we are seeing this demonization card. So both these things are gone hand in hand. So native peoples all over the world are facing this situation. Their culture has been destroyed, civilization has been destroyed, history has been destroyed, artifacts have been destroyed. They have no consciousness of who they were. The few people who are awakened have got multi-generational trauma and trying to still figure out who on earth are they. So this is the situation. So it is utterly, critically important to have decoloniality, trying to understand this process of colonization and trying to undo its effects in every aspect, starting from identity. Who are we? Set that in stone, who we are. Once you understand who we are and why we are different from this genocidal colonizing ideology, once we make the difference clear, then we can build our own notions of who we are, our own ideas who we are based on evidence. So this is the difficulty, Aditya ji. The native populations don't have the luxury that Indians have. Indians still have a strong connection to the past. Neither the Islamic people nor the Christian people have been able to destroy the Indian civilization. And we are still able to have a lot of our past, and we are recording it, and we are getting a strong narrative. Unfortunately, for the people, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the other people in Central America, South America, North America, they don't have that luxury because they have been utterly decimated and utterly removed away to great detriments in their societies today. The alcoholism that you see, the poverty that you see, the illiteracy that you see is an outcome of the destruction of these civilizations, utter genocide and ethnocide by these colonizing forces. Knowledge will hopefully take us there.
In 1908, Vatican declared that the colonization of America is complete because the European settlers are more in numbers than the Native Americans. And European settlers at that time were 15 million. That means the Native Americans were approximately 12 million in 1908. Today, they are just 5 million. There are no religious places left. Regularly, pipelines are built over their lands. Regularly, the borders are constructed over their sacred burial sites. Regularly. It is still going on. Colonization has not stopped. Consistently, there are only 4 million native Mexicans left in a 110 million country, that too in an area which is largely inhabited towards the south. And still the church propaganda goes on. What happened to Native Americans in California through 21 missions, everybody knows. And what happens to Maoris in New Zealand, what happened to Aborigines who are still fighting in Australia is still going on. There is only one voice of reason, and that is India left, who can speak for these people, not only their own, but also to speak for these people. So, Raj, always a pleasure to speak with you. I could have gone on hours and hours with you, but we'll schedule more discussions on this. We'll take region specific now, and hopefully you'll have time for us. And for all the viewers who are watching, do comment on the YouTube video and let us know your feedback. And I know I have seen a lot of your comments here. I could not take all those questions because some of them were not relevant, I'll be honest with you, and some of them were digressing from the topic. So thank you so much for all for joining, and thank you all for listening to this show. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.